That's no moon. It's a space station.
Hey guys, welcome back to the show. Just a quick reminder that Aaron and I will be speaking at the Mind Nexus Live Conference next month, September 26th through the 27th in Tucson, Arizona.
26th to 29th.
26th, yeah, 26th to 29th. Yeah, it's one day.
Not one day, yeah.
But they just finally released day passes. Now you can buy day passes if you can't make it for the entire thing. A day pass is $149.99, and that link is below in the description, along with our promo codes. Either Aaron and I each have our own codes, discount codes, where you can save $50 on your 4-day pass or 3-day pass. And just take advantage of that, guys. We're really trying to, make this event happen and pull in some last minute ticket sales. So we would love to see you there and take advantage of those discount codes. So today we are joined by Patrick Riley. Patrick is a retired 16-year combat veteran from the U.S. Army, where he led extensive medical and psychological operations, among many other things. And we'll let him actually do a better job of introducing himself. But I saw his interview with Carrie Cassidy on Project Camelot pertaining to the secret space program and his knowledge of what he's seen by bumping shoulders with some of these intelligence agencies and talking to people in the know, essentially, about where these programs lie within the government. And I found it fascinating. He has a level-headed approach, and it's important, I think, to bring in people that aren't claiming to have been a part of the programs, but claiming to have knowledge of the programs and have military credentials. So I think that's important. And without saying too much, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Patrick, and let you introduce yourself a little better than I did, because, you're an inventor of many technologies and over Unity designs and things of that nature. So welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Tyler, and thank you, Aaron. It's a pleasure to be here. So as you alluded to, I am a combat veteran. I spent about half my life in the Army and got out once the vaccine mandates came down. But during my time in the Army, I was deployed many times. But back in 2009, when I was deployed to Iraq, I was blown up and became an acquired savant. I became a little bit smarter than I was prior to that. And once that happened, I started inventing and I started understanding and seeing systems. So initially I started with redesigning motors because I came back from Iraq and I started building cars from the ground up, from frame up really. And it was something I was never taught. It was something I intrinsically understood because I could see systems as they were meant to function. And I knew when something was out of place. I knew when something was broken or something needed to be added. It was as if the knowledge was there without me having to ask for it. And as I went on from working on motors and whatnot, I started to ask some pretty simple questions about how I could do it better. And I definitely arrived at those answers and would end up inventing a over Unity device. And I've got a couple other designs, about 30 or so inventions I've worked on. And during my time in the Army, I continued on as a combat medic. I earned my master's in forensic psychology and a MBA, and I eventually ended up in PsyOps and civil affairs, deploying all over Southeast Asia for about the last 5 years of my career until I finally got out. And as I knew I was getting out, I launched a few businesses on the XRP ledger. So I've got 7 different companies and tokens that are hosting financial services, very similar to what everyone wants from the QFS, is what we're providing on the XRP ledger.
Yeah, that's great. And
it's amazing.
And I guess let's talk about your inventions just for a second, because something you mentioned on the interviews with Carrie Cassidy is why you decided not to go through with patenting your designs and why that's so crucial. I mean, we kind of understand, but you kind of did your homework, right? And you did some investigations into what could actually happen if you tried to patent these new free energy technologies.
Yeah, so this has been a crux of our society for the last 150 years, but essentially the the inventions that are disruptive are always going to be crushed by the establishment, not just,
Yeah.
government, but big money and corporations in general, because disruption is not good for their bottom line. But the 1951 Patent Secrecy Act provided the government the means to go in and slap any patent application with a National Defense Authorization Act order saying that it is a threat to national security. And effectively, you are then put under an espionage charge if you are talking about your own intellectual property, your own ideas publicly, or sharing them. So by applying for a patent, you're asking for the government's permission. In my situation, I have no interest in asking the government's permission. I worked for them long enough, and I know that they are failing the American people in far too many ways. So instead of patenting it, and instead of trying to profit from it, what I did was I minted it to about a dozen different blockchains as NFTs. So those NFTs are accessible and viewable by anybody that wants to go and look at the open ledgers of the blockchains. And those NFTs represent the designs and some of the detail of what you would need to produce my designs. And I hope that people will produce them. I hope that they'll use them to power their homes, power their cars, mine Bitcoin, whatever it is that makes them happy. But I'm putting it out there, and it is very disruptive. And all you've got to do is build it.
And explain why that's the better option, because I guess it can't be taken down essentially unless the entire system crashes. Is that the way I understand it?
That's correct. So the government or the powers that be would have to take down the entire Bitcoin network, the entire Ethereum network, Solana, Avalanche, Hedera, XRP Ledger, and I'm forgetting the rest of them right now. But there's multiple blockchain ledgers they would have to completely disembowel in order to take those NFTs out of circulation.
Right, right. Thank you for sharing that. So your time spent with the military, for one, you mentioned being involved with psychological operations and civil affairs. And so that's interesting in itself. And I have a lot of questions in that arena. But I guess with your involvement, you talked about being overseas a lot and being consistently accused of being CIA, bumping shoulders with the intelligence agencies. So along your journey, meeting these people who had inside knowledge, how did you start discovering that there was a secret program or programs that existed within the government?
Well, so the first thing that really popped out at me was the amount of money that we were spending for specific influences, and that money was often being channeled through NGOs or non-governmental organizations. And so that was a rather blatant sign that the money coming from these NGOs was actually being managed by intelligence agencies, whether that was CIA or some other three-letter alphabet soup agency, didn't really matter. But the finances themselves started to speak to me, if you will, in the way that I was seeing the system. And as I followed the money, it was very obvious that most of the funding going towards things that we would consider under the purview of the SSP was actually under the umbrella of the IDA and federally funded research and development companies. So there was at least a dozen different companies and corporations that were completely private, from Renaissance Technologies down to Rand Corporation and the MIT Advanced Technology Labs working with DARPA and things of that nature, that it was very obvious to me that was where advanced technology was being developed outside of the legitimate chain of command from what we would perceive as civilians to be the legitimate chain of command.
Yeah, and you mentioned that the aerospace industry and the government of, the Congress and all that would be the misdirect. People would expect the secret space program to lie within those agencies, those corporations, organizations, but a lot of them might, be hidden behind shell companies, but then there's these other companies that are involved that people would never suspect. And I think that's what's important to focus on is, where this money's going and how it's being funneled.
Yeah, so a large majority of the funding is produced for the black budget through the drug trade, and the CIA through Project Gladio, washing their money through the Vatican and the mafia, through Southeast Asia and heroin and opium trades. That entire business, there is no cartel or gang that is organized. There's no organized criminal enterprise on this planet that is not working for or under some type of intelligence agency, whether that's a westernized US or the Mossad or Beijing or some other. They are all within that structure, and all of those illegal activities are funding what we would call the SSP, and that money is floating up into these corporations, which are not receiving it necessarily through the NSF or National Science Foundation, not receiving it through official channels, but receiving it through back channels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess through your research in your research and development of these technologies, I mean, a lot of the stuff that we're dealing with now that people like you are inventing seems to have already been invented years ago, decades ago, by the shadow government, you could call them, and has existed for a very long time on this planet, and dating back maybe even potentially to the late 1800s, early 1900s. And I was just curious if you could share any knowledge that you had surrounding that.
Yeah, certainly. So I definitely agree that most of this has been around probably greater than 100 years. Of course, we all know about Nikola Tesla and his many different designs that were confiscated and hidden from the public. His earthquake machine back in 1896 is seemingly actively in use these days. But from what I developed, and I would say that I'm capable, I'm generally intelligent, but knowing what I can do at my level with my limited resources gives me a great insight into what the government would have been able to do 100 years ago, which should have been greater than what I'm capable of now and today. And most people don't really have a conceptual understanding of how far removed a breakaway civilization could be. I'm not saying that I know that it is, but the simple opportunity for it to be there. So if we were to look at things like the nuclear bomb, the atom bomb, which was developed in the 1930s, while people were still using horse and buggy and still listening to AM radio, and they had little 9-inch no volume, no color TVs if they were rich. And that was the time period where we developed the atomic bomb. And by the 1960s, by late 1960s, we had the SR-71 Blackbird and its sister plane, the XR-71, which was the space-based equivalent of the SR-71 Blackbird. Moving into the late 80s, where we had the Apollo missions, but we were in the height of the Cold War, which was, of course, largely faked to bring in additional funding. And in the height of that Cold War, where we were supposedly under a nuclear threat, including a nuclear threat from space, we allegedly canceled and defunded our space program. Of course, then rolling out another 5 or 6 years till the fall of the Soviet Union. So the idea that we would have canceled or done such a thing at such a heightened time in history for the advancement of technology, especially space-based technology, is a little bit corny and ridiculous. So it's very easy for me to see where we should be much, much farther ahead than we are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
and it's not like they aren't telling us. They show us in so many ways. I mean, you could just pick up like a popular mechanics magazine or a popular science magazine, and over the years, they kind of roll out these technologies and show you, but then you never see it. It never manifests into anything publicly.
And I do want to caveat, there are good reasons as well as bad reasons for why some of this technology is kept under wraps. So I'm not unaware of the ramifications of what I'm doing by releasing my radial design over Unity device. So when I look at something like that could be produced for as little as $5,000, and it's roughly the size of a V8 motor that could go in a car, right? Now, that is something that does directly threaten national security. And the reason for that is because America, with a population of 340 million, is no comparison to China with a population of 1.7 billion. And the reality is what keeps America the strongest and the most secure militarily is geography. It's our oceans and it's supply chain interruption. So logistics is the only reason that we have not been invaded as a nation, because the logistical challenges of transporting an entire invasion force over the Atlantic or over the Pacific from any other nation is untenable currently. When you throw in something like a free energy device that can replace a standard motor and you throw it into a amphibious tank, now you have China with the ability to raise an army of 100 million people and the ability to crank out enough steel to put them all in something that can cross the ocean with 2 weeks of supplies. And now you have a very valid, realistic threat of a great nation or great power struggle because of that disruptive technology. Whereas right now, the US maintains power essentially by our ability to cut off oil. Anytime there would be a world war, we would bomb the hell out of the Middle East. We'd blow up all the oil rigs and we'd set them on fire. And then we would dwindle the supply chains and the ability of our enemies, if you will, to project power. So there are good reasons for this. Now, do I think that the people in charge of this technology that have this more advanced technology are thinking about the American people or considering the potential benefits or the weighing those risks and rewards? I don't. I think they're completely incompetent and completely corrupted.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So, okay, if this technology exists, it's not on the surface, it's underground. We're aware of the deep underground military bases and that entire network. And you've even been in some of those bases, which you can tell us about if you'd like. So, help paint a picture for our audience. How did we get to space with this technology in the 40s and 50s, allegedly?
So back in the 50s, when we had post-World War II, when we were starting to go against the Soviets, which was largely a reaction of the Soviet side to Operation Paperclip and the US going in and essentially rescuing, not capturing high-level Nazi scientists, etc. And we brought them to the US. We gave them autonomy, authority, and no accountability. So effectively, the US became the Nazi threat to the Soviets, and the Soviets were, of course, developing their own nuclear deterrence, courtesy of Robert Oppenheimer, who leaked much of his work to them as a communist. I don't know if everyone knows the history out there, but he did it as a means that he thought would prevent the United States from having absolute power over the world and becoming a tyrannical empire. But I digress. So as the Soviets were developing everything nuclear, and nuclear really became very sexy in the 50s, it became very palatable to the Soviet leadership to put nuclear power into just about anything, whether it was a bulldozer or a terrain, which was the equivalent of a submarine, or of course the nuclear submarines. And so when they started to look at going to space, and the US and Russia were both in the nuclear submarine game, they were already looking at how do we survive in an alien environment without oxygen for 30 to 90 days. And they were already doing it in nuclear submarines. So now the question wasn't so much how do we build a rocket to put a spaceship out in orbit. The question was within the Navy, within the SSP, which is actually the Strategic Systems Program for Development within the Navy. It still exists today. It's still called that. And that's where SSP moniker kind of turned into Secret Space Program. But that entity was looking at how do we lift an entire nuclear submarine out of the water and get it into space. And so that's when you look at, well, I'm lifting something very heavy, so I need to make it lighter. So you're looking at helium, and you're looking at compressed gas helium within a compressed cylinder that is able to, make it more buoyant compared to the air around it. Now, the larger you make that submarine, the lighter you can make it, because the more helium compression you can fit into that submarine before it would turn to liquid. So you've got about 11.68 kilograms per cubic meter. So you want to basically scale up. So the larger the scale, the easier it is to do. And with that, you can then put additional balloons or additional dirigibles on top of that floating submarine that is now full of helium. And you can lift it out of the water from an area that's completely out of sight of the rest of prying eyes. And you're able to get what's basically known as the cigar-shaped UFO crafts that are known today. And if you were to get that close enough to space where it's lighter, you could use rockets to boost it, or you could use angular momentum to basically throw it into space.
Interesting. So this is why, we know NASA has invested in helium, and I guess that, like you said in the previous interviews, they fake a lot of stuff nowadays, but they're just a cover company. They would be the shell company, right?
Yeah.
And so do you think that they're investing in helium for these purposes?
Yeah, that's exactly what I think they're doing. I think they are launching larger craft, and they are using helium to do so, to elevate that craft and then to send it into orbit. And I've designed my own space station that we intend to launch from one of my companies. And I have a video of that, so I can give the audience a visual of exactly what I'm talking about.
Yes. Yeah. Share that, please. And yeah, we can have a visual, and then I have more questions. So we'll watch this really quick.
Yeah, so this video is about 5 minutes, so it's not all going to be relevant, but essentially what I'm doing here is a 500-meter diameter toroidal space station with a 250-meter void in the center. It's 100 meters in width, and I would be compressing helium into this for launch day. And then I'm using basically what I call the jellyfish, which is just a big old balloon. And I'm using that balloon to pull it towards the moon at optimal conditions from the equator. So the moon, of course, is going to assist a little bit, just slightly, but every bit counts. But it's going to assist in lightening that pull of the Earth's quote unquote gravity. I hate the term gravity because it's not what people think it is. But we would be able to lift this very large 5 million pound craft into about 40,000 feet. And then these are actually Starship boosters that are shown underneath it, with a array of 12 different Starship boosters, each with a lifting capacity of 400 tons. So now at 40,000 feet, we'd be able to fire the boosters, free and clear of all population centers. And now we would push it out into the Lagrange point, which is the balancing point between the Earth and the moon, where it takes the least amount of work for the station to stay in its orbit.
Right. So it's so interesting to me because, like, essentially you just told us they've already done something to this capacity, but
Yes.
what I think is going to happen on the planet is that we have to do it again, because I don't see them ever technically releasing this stuff to the public anytime soon anyway. But if people like you start developing this stuff and throwing these ideas around, right, we're affecting the collective consciousness. And I think the 100th monkey effect comes into play. And then now a lot of people, you're planting that idea, you're planting that seed for people all over the planet. And now we can start doing this in the public domain.
Yeah, exactly. You can kill a man, but you can't kill an idea. And we're putting this on the blockchain and making it something that is not able to be suppressed, all while not asking the permission of the government, is the only way that this gets done. If anyone is looking to make a profit or to get the government's permission on a patent, it's kind of that cardinal sin of greed and pride that will get them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need any money from this. I just want to see it work.
Right. Aaron,
Right.
did you have any questions before we move on?
No, I was just going to say, so Stephen Greer, I know, love him or hate him. I think he's doing amazing work still. I don't agree with him and everything, but He's been preaching this for a long time about, I mean, he's been trying to work with free energy inventors and trying to get them to do it the right way because he knows how the system works and that they're going to get taken out. It's going to get squashed because they all want to be like, no, this is my thing and I need to release it on my own. He's like, dude, that's not going to happen. You
Yeah,
don't understand. Like, what you just said, release it on the blockchain, release it in a way that it's out there to everyone and it can't be, you can't put the cat back in the bag at that point. And now it's just publicly available to everyone. Anyone can build it with, all the information of how to build it, create it. It's out there all at once. They can't do anything at that point, So that's the way to do if you're going to release this stuff. It's just a matter of figuring out how to do it correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will just throw this out there for everyone's kind of information because I think it should be said. Stephen Greer's team did reach out to me.
Really?
But they were also very condescending and basically said that if there's not a working device that I can demonstrate, that they're not interested, which is fine by me. I wasn't actually asking for their help. But I would caution everybody that those individuals who are famous within this space, who are the people you think you're going to go to when you have the answers to get help, those are typically the gatekeepers. They're the honeypots that are going to trap you and prevent you from moving forward.
Yep.
So no disrespect to Stephen Greer. I didn't speak to him directly, just his team, but don't look for Stephen Greer's help.
Right.
Well, that's a great example of like he's saying all the right things, but then he's still being a gatekeeper and
Absolutely.
like he's like playing both sides kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like listen to what he's saying but don't go to him, don't look to him as like a savior or a
Exactly.
like you said, there's a reason why he's so popular and
Right.
he's doing fine,
They
'cause
keep
he's probably
certain people elevated for a reason.
right.
Okay, so going back to the underground bases, you talked about specifically being involved in training to fight subterranean warfare. I think it was back in like 2018 or somewhere around that time whenever we were seeing the articles coming out about the military training soldiers to fight underground. Can you explain why we were doing that and what your involvement was?
Yep. So there in 2018, the U.S. military, and this is official public record, that about $500 million was spent training 34 out of 36 BCTs or brigade combat teams on underground military operations. Now, this wasn't necessarily saying that we were going for dumps. There's also cave networks throughout Israel, throughout the Middle East, throughout Iran. Iran is very big on what we would consider domes, but they are essentially very well-built caves. But we're looking at how to fight in a constricted environment where oxygen and things like gas or seaburn becomes a much larger threat within a confined environment. So we were training largely on how we would communicate. Of course, if you are underground and you're out of line of sight, you're probably not going to have radio communication. It's easy to get lost. It's easy to get smoked out and lose visual. It's easy to lose your ability to breathe. And it's easy to step into booby traps. So all of those things were basically the items that we were focusing on. So it was military operations in urban terrain, but underground. And that does very much change the tactics and the operations of any small unit or any large unit. Now, of course, I was doing this training as a medic and with some operators and how we would operate from a 2-man to a 5-man team in an underground environment. And that's very different from what most of the BCTs and brigade combat teams would have been doing as far as large unit, large scale operations. And I did see some of these structures or some of these bases throughout my time in Southeast Asia. Some of them were very old and some of them were very recent. Of course, most of what I did with civil affairs and PSYOPs would still be classified, and I am on a SF-312 for another about 20 years and just retired in late 2022. So I have some time before I would even be able to consider sharing too many details, but it's a thing. It exists. Every nation has them. There's tens of thousands of them globally, and it is the future of warfare because, frankly, bunker busters and everything else makes everything on the surface nearly useless as far as defensive positions go.
Right. So you were actually training as a medic, what you would do in warlike scenarios on the ground as a medic.
That's correct. So things like just adding wheels to a stretcher make a big difference in an underground environment.
Right. Interesting. So whenever okay, in your time in the military and, like I said, interacting with intelligence agencies, did you come across people that shared information with you pertaining to this subject, like specifically maybe about the secret space program or anything of that nature that we're just not supposed to know about? Did they talk about it openly, or was this something that was not really?
There was times when I would catch the names of vessels or things that were in briefings that I wasn't necessarily read in on, but I was certainly aware that the Helencotter and the LeMay are specific vessels that are not within the uh, ocean-based Navy of the United States, and I was very much aware that they were talking about things that were, to put a pun on it, above my head. So although I can certainly say these things were being discussed, I wasn't privy to the large majority of the information. Everything's compartmentalized and everything is on a need to know basis. I did have a situation in which I met with an individual in one of the Southeast Asian countries, and he wanted to whistleblow to me, and he brought out a shoebox to show me some pictures and what he had for evidence to basically blow the whistle. And within that was a mask that appeared to be of very high technology origin, that was not only a mask, but also still seemed to be a living biological technology as I held it, still warm to the touch as if I was touching someone's face. Very, very strange, very bizarre. Do I know that it belonged to an alien? Absolutely not. I don't know that. But it was certainly bizarre enough for me to be taken aback by it.
And you mentioned when you talked about this and with Carrie Cassidy, you mentioned seeing the imprint on the inside of the mask, and it didn't look necessarily human.
It did not look human. The lenses within it that were humanized to the front appeared to be lenses for something not human in the back, and the imprint appeared to be scales of some sort, or a grid that was in a triangular and hexagonal patterns.
So a reptilian, possibly.
Potentially.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. And, we've discussed this CIA mask a lot on this show, and, they so much as came out themselves and demonstrated these masks. And that was a long time ago. It's not a stretch of the imagination to think that they have a biological living organism, a mask that literally would act and function like the human body.
Yeah. They certainly could, and if they have technology at that level, it's easily 100 years beyond anything else I had ever seen. It was very, very advanced.
Wow. See, that's fascinating to me. Because I think I would guess that a lot of the world leaders and royal family would be wearing masks like that if I were to guess. I don't know, but so as far as your knowledge of, like, when, I guess World War II was when all this technology started, Germany was involved first, right? And then you mentioned that Operation Paperclip was more of a rescue operation, and I've never heard anyone say that before. So I was wondering if you could expand on that.
It was. So the Rothschild Bank of the United States and the Federal Reserve, that was, of course, the creature from Jekyll Island. The Rothschilds and Rockefellers and JP Morgans and that same group of men also created the Council of Foreign Relations. And as the Council of Foreign Relations went on to found the SSO, which would become the CIA, they effectively had full control and ownership through the Fed of that intelligence agency. Simultaneously, Rothschilds, Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, and Prescott Bush, Henry Ford were the same group of men that were funding and founded the Nazi Party of Germany. In 1933, you could actually go to Manhattan to see the Nazi headquarters, and it was part of Union Pacific Bank under Prescott Bush. Of course, Bush Jr.'s grandfather. Even the skull and bones logo on the Nazi SS officers' caps came from the skull and bones of Yale University, which Prescott Bush was a part of. So this was a lending of the tradition to the Nazi Party, not the other way around. So now, as that happened, of course, these bankers, these cabal, if you will, individuals had invested a lot of money in the development of Nazi Germany. And so in their mindset, they owned the assets and resources of Germany, as Germany would eventually lose the war. Now, America did not defeat the Nazis in World War II. Russia effectively defeated Germany. America went in to rescue what was the property of the higher command, which was the Rothschild, Rockefellers, Fords, Bushes, etc. Alan Dulles, if that name doesn't ring a bell.
Right.
So that was essentially the recast of the image after Nazi Germany failed to achieve the mission that those banking cartels wanted it to achieve.
Wow. So yeah, that's an interesting take on it. And I agree that we didn't win the war technically. And, you know, the paperclip scientists were embedded in the entire infrastructure over here. I mean, every corporation, every organization. And so I guess, you know, we've heard tales of the Nazis going to Antarctica and like starting breeding programs essentially to, you know, create or maintain the pure-blooded Aryan race and all that stuff. But you mentioned something in a previous interview about these breakaway civilizations and underground bases potentially having breeding programs that would essentially fuel the SSP, right? And fuel programs. They need people, but the people can't be connected to the surface world. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking of it from a extrapolation of if we were to say we created a secret organization between the three of us, and that organization has technology, but we're not trying to risk our technological superiority as we attempt to expand and do what every other human civilization has ever done in history is to expand and to explore and to try to make the most out of its advantages. So as the CIA was under the Nazis and all of this, and Mossad and Israel is actually founded by Nazi Germany and the same group of people and the Rothschilds and etc. But this entire organization started to take to blackmail as a way to keep it secret. And as a way to keep their secret, they initially were doing things like the Playboy Mansion, which was, tunneled under to the Getty Museum, which was Joseph P. Goebbels. And it was, this ability to blackmail people in the know with cheating on their wives or things like that. But eventually that wasn't enough. It needed to be very concrete, and effectively these people lost empathy for humanity somewhere along the way. And it emerged from Playboy bunnies into, teenagers and eventually into children. And then from that, the only truly concrete way to make sure somebody is keeping a secret is to have something so damning that it's completely unforgivable. So that means that at some point, my understanding is it became the custom that in order for a high value individual, whether that's a politician or somebody that's maybe a famous musician even, in order for them to be read in on the secret of this society, they had to essentially rape and murder a minor to become a part of the club. Now, that was a natural progression over the years. Things like MK Ultra and things like, black syphilis and all the other messed up things that our government was already doing to people and to children. So those experimentations eventually became the way that they could keep people in check and in line. So with that kind of secrecy and with that kind of blackmail on large amounts of individuals, that any kind of secrecy is going to breed corruption because there's no accountability within that secrecy. So it got even worse as things went on. And of course, we know Hillary Clinton is running the entire cocaine cartels of Colombia right now and things of that nature, and human trafficking out of Haiti and so many things that I can fully support and fully defend. But it's now the modus operandi. So the breakaway civilization, of course, some of those children are going to be used and killed, but you're also going to want to colonize. If you're able to go interstellar, if you're able to go to another planet, you're going to want to create colonies out there that are not going to conflict with your way of thought or the way you control or command that base. So the easiest way for them to do that would be to breed children into those programs or into those colonies from a very young age. And then if they needed to dilute that gene pool so that they wouldn't have inbreeding, they would need more children. So I think that there's a case to be made that it's the natural evolution of what we can verify. And based on the observation of data points today, we can strongly suggest or suspect that that is the truth of the situation. So when I look at Epstein and some of the high-level scientists that he was bringing out to Epstein Island, guys like Stephen Hawking, who was, of course, immobile, or down to MIT lab people, or many of the people you can find within the FFRCs or the former CEO of Renaissance Technologies. These high-level scientists, their only reason to be part of that same group with politicians and actors is if, well, they were working on something. And that something had to stay very secret, because we know this was a blackmail operation. Now, people are probably thinking, why actors? Why is P. Diddy out there on this list? And why are the famous people out there? Well, it's probably because it's run in a military manner, and it's run very similar to what we do with the USO currently here. So if you have officers up there in orbit or out on other worlds that are, probably somewhat homesick, wouldn't you, if you have all the money and all the corruption in the world, somebody out there is a fan of Beyonce, and they're going to get Beyonce to go to this colony and do a concert. But she's got to join a club, right? They're going to get P. Diddy, but he's got to join a club. And then, of course, you have the control of the media, and you have the control of every news agency, and you have the control of our elections and other things that all just naturally fall under this umbrella of influence.
Wow, that's an amazing analysis is or extrapolation, as you would say, of what could possibly be happening right now. And so you're saying that, a lot of the people that were brought to Epstein Island, that went to Epstein Island, did it against their will, essentially. They were compromised there.
You would probably only have to forcibly compromise 10 to 20%, whereas the other 80 to 90% are probably willing to do whatever it takes to attain power, because power and secrecy attracts psychopaths and sociopaths who are more than willing to do those things. We know beyond any reason that the large majority of our politicians are morally flexible and completely amoral and completely aethical. And they do what will get them reelected or get them further down the halls of power. And I don't think it's a stretch at all to say that the majority of our politicians, the majority of our Congress is compromised.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not a stretch. I mean, that's likely the case, right? I mean, it is in some cases very obvious. So these children that go missing every year, you explained what you think happens to them, but so let's paint a picture. You think they would go underground and be raised in a military base, and essentially mind controlled and groomed so they never question authority and they don't know any different. They could be the perfect soldier, slave, whatever. You think
Yep.
that's the
So
case?
you would want them compliant, so that may be happening. Of course, I don't know this, but you would also want them untraceable. So we would need to look closer at things like our social services system, which as much as 60% of our children in the United States within social service are trafficked, according to some sources. And you got to look at the kids who have no connections whatsoever. Of course, the migrants coming over the border who, you know, their parents are dead or something of that nature, but there are very few children. So actually in 2011, I was working on Joint Task Force North on the border to New Mexico and Chihuahua province in northern Mexico. And yes, that's a real province. If you're a gringo, I'm sorry. Chihuahua province. So just crossed the border from Columbus, New Mexico, and in 2011 we found about 11 mass graves, totaling about 6,000 bodies that had been deposited over a period of about 5 years. There are public sources on this. Y'all can go and look it up. And we ended up arresting the sheriff's department for assisting in guns and drugs trafficking. But the point I'm getting at is that those bodies were not only a few times the population of Palomas, the nearest town in Mexico, that had been killed within those mass graves, but they were also largely adults. There was very few teenagers that were within those remains. And that told me that it was very statistically unlikely that this number of adults had been killed, that very few of them would have had any children in tow or traveling with them that might have been killed as well. So it makes sense that the parents are killed and the children are then disappeared.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's horrible to think of that, but that's the reality of the situation. I mean, that needs to be discussed because, a lot of people don't like when we talk about certain things because they think we're like, bathing in those negative frequencies. But if people don't understand, they're going to be unknowingly, subconsciously complicit in this stuff by supporting certain companies and agendas unknowing and unbeknownst to them. So
there's a big difference between shining the light on the darkness and bathing in the energy of the darkness and dwelling in that energy. It's not the same thing.
right. Right.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And that's what we try to do. We try to shine a light on it and then dwell in the energy of love and,
Right.
truth.
So let's talk about psychological operations and flat Earth. I
Yeah.
mean, in a nutshell, I mean, I haven't heard you say anything about the planet being flat in any of this discussion of anything you've discovered, researched, experienced yourself, and you've been a part of the psychological operations, and you understand that it is very much warfare.
Mhm.
What do you think is going on with this flat Earth theory?
Well, I'm not a supporter of the flat Earth area. I did do a couple hour long debate with Witsit Gets It, Austin Witsit, who's one of the bigger flat Earth debaters out there. And I support a global spheroid model. However, I'm also really a subscriber to the Schrodinger Earth. And I take Socrates to heart, which is, true wisdom comes from knowing that I know nothing.
Right.
As I look at things like universal consciousness and our consciousness truly shaping reality, which is something I hope to do my doctoral dissertation on, I do think that the majority of humanity, the 100th monkey, as you said, believing or suspecting that the earth is flat at one point in history may well have made, at that point in history, the earth was flat. And now there is a large contingent that thinks it's round and a contingent that thinks it's flat. And by the string theory laws and by multiverse and quantum physics laws of Schrodinger, we would be able to say the Earth is both flat and round. It's either or until it is proven to be one or the other irreversibly.
Right.
Now, I don't think that NASA is a reliable source by any means. I don't think that Einstein is a reliable source by any means. He's a fraud for those who don't know. So in that regard, there's room for debate, and I can certainly have a respectful discussion with flat earthers about why I don't think flat Earth is a practical model. But nonetheless, if that's their idea, if
Right.
that's what they want to believe, then hey, more power to them.
Right. We interviewed a guy, Daryl James. You may or may not be familiar with him. He's former U.S. Navy, and he was made aware by his executive officer. This is what he says, right? Everything, we're just taking people's word for it at this point. But he was told by his executive officer that the flat Earth PSYOP was created by Michael Aquino in 1980, who was the head of psychological operations in the military at the time. And he said that anyone who is promoting flat Earth or sharing flat Earth videos is either intentionally deceiving or unintentionally deceiving. They don't know that they're deceiving, but they've been tricked or manipulated into believing this. And he asked, why would they do this? And he said the Satanists love confusion. And bottom line, it's to confuse people.
Well, there's a psychological benefit to convincing the population that there is a flat Earth. There's not much benefit to convincing them that it is a globe Earth if it is not a globe Earth. So in that sense, I could certainly see it being Aquino. For those who don't know much about Michael Aquino, he was former lieutenant colonel in Army PSYOPs who wrote Mind War and went on to form the Temple of Set and things of that nature. The other co-author of Mind War was Vallely, who later became General Vallely, who confirmed the existence of the Q operations and former commander of 351st, my former unit. So I'm very familiar with Aquino and his work, of course. It's kind of required reading for us in my old profession.
So that you mentioned the Q operations, and that's something that we've actually did a 4-hour webinar. We did a deep dive. I mean, we dug up everything we could to either disprove or prove that this was a real operation. What are your thoughts on it?
I certainly think it was a real operation. I discovered it personally by researching things that I was actively doing while working in operations in the military. So those operations that many were classified led me to research, which led me directly to Q. So there was certainly validity within it. I don't necessarily know that all of it's valid. I don't personally subscribe to a Trump savior complex. I think that he's got quite a bit of flaws that are unfortunate. But that said, I do think there is certainly something behind Q.
Yeah, I agree. That's the conclusion we came to as well. There was just too much to ignore. I mean, if you're going to look at it, really, it was just kind of overwhelming in a way. And then, the rabbit holes that you would find yourself down just by reading the Q drops.
And there's a time aspect.
Yeah.
There's a time travel / time viewing aspect to it where they would know years in advance exactly what's going to happen, exactly the time, exactly the date, like in the exact way. And then and there was definitely a link with Trump and whatever was going on in this, you could call them the white hats or whatever, where Q would post like the exact phrase that Trump would say or at the exact timestamp, and it's in the Q post, and all these things are like, it's like, and Q even said in his own posts, at what point is it mathematically impossible, to be a coincidence.
Right.
And it's like that point was gone a long, long time ago, as far as I'm concerned, with everything I've seen. There's definitely something going on for sure. Now, what exactly is going on, I don't know, but I know it seems to be exposing the corruption and the evil, and that can only be a good thing in my mind. And it seems to be fighting it. So
Yeah, and the interview I did with Carrie Cassidy on my technology inventions, the 4 technologies that I released publicly combined together do actually enable information to be sent backwards in time, and it would make something like Q or Mr. Pool or things of that nature theoretically possible, but within those theories, within that technology that I demonstrate, I don't want to go on about it because it'll take hours here, but it does prove that that is very much possible through FTL or faster than light travel in conjunction with quantum entanglement to send information from the past or from the present to the past. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what you thought of time travel technology and with the secret space program, we can make sense of that. But when we bring time travel into it, I mean, it's kind of hand in hand. If we're going to believe one half of it, the other half we have to. Stands reason to believe that time travel is involved as well.
So in a nutshell, the 4 technologies I released, there's the over unity device, there's a ionic drive circuit, which is basically a rocket engine, right? So we've got a motor generating electricity, we've got an electric rocket engine, we've got quantum entangled communication, so it's instantaneous communication across time and space, and you've got faster than light travel. So what that will enable is if we were to build a rocket that I call the Thoth rocket, the god of knowledge, then we would be able to send that rocket out 10 light years away. And as the light that was touching the Earth 10 years ago is reaching that rocket, we are collecting that and we are viewing it. Basically, we'd be able to create a 4-dimensional Google Earth where we could rewind time looking at any point on the Earth as we see it. But what we can also do is we can now put on a brain computer interface. We are reading your theta waves and beta waves and all those things, and we're reading the physical biological structure within your brain right now. And as we're looking at you 10 years ago, and we're communicating it instantaneously because we have quantum entangled communication, we can also say, here's the temperature, here's the biological physical structures that were present in your brain 10 years ago, here's the frequency, and here's the vibration. And now we can walk up a quantum entanglement of your brain in the current time to your brain in the past. And now the thoughts that you're having today are being in some form communicated to yourself in the past 10 years ago. The idea that time is linear is completely disproven at this point. Time is a solid. Everything that is happening and will happen is solid, and it is a current thing. It's only our perception of movement through time and space that allows us to perceive time.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's, time is, and on one hand, time is an illusion, but on another hand, we're all living by the clock every day. And no matter whether you want to believe it or not. And I read books on time travel, and one of the things that I came across said, time is an illusion, but on Earth, it's real. And it makes sense because it is linear here, the way we perceive it. But that doesn't mean like zoomed out that there's much more to it, right?
Exactly. So we are stuck in the 3rd dimension as a civilian species currently. But what I was talking about with my technology is once we do have that ability to communicate with ourselves in the past, now we've broken that 4th wall. We've broken into the 4th dimension of time, because now you could very possibly know all of the span of your life from a very early age and make choices within that. And that makes humanity a 4th dimensional species at that point.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would not be opposed to doing a part 2 where we really get into your technologies, because I'm fascinated in all of it so far from what I've heard. But I want to rewind a little bit. You mentioned Renaissance technologies earlier, and I'm not familiar with that. And I was wondering if you could explain who they are.
So there's only a few companies out there with financials that are so beyond the scale that they were completely unexplainable. Things like FTX or Enron, and Renaissance Technologies is right up there with those in that category. However, the former CEO of Renaissance Technologies, who was on Epstein Island, and one of Epstein's best friends came out of an organization called IDA. IDA is the Institute for Defense Analysis, which is a completely almost unheard of organization that employs thousands of doctorate level physicists and engineers. Now, this is, of course, IDA is going to create taskings or contracts from within IDA. We're talking 1,000 different doctors creating requests for technologies to be developed and built that are then tasked out to FFRCs, or federally funded research companies. So, of course, that's from 1,000, and we imagine how many must be working on each of those requests, and how many requests are being put out by each of those scientists per year. We start to see a picture where, okay, well, here's a governmental organization that is completely unheard of, that is being funded almost completely off the books. All of its taskings go to civilian companies that nobody ever thinks about or knows of. And it's all tied into Epstein, but also we're looking at up to 100,000 different requests and contracts being made per year for technologies and advancements that we never hear about. So that is a very substantial organization. And to think that there isn't some sort of secret space program within that structure, to me, it would be insanity.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Thank you for saying that. This kind of a side note. What are your thoughts? There's a lot of people out there claiming, not a lot, but I've heard claims that the world debt has been paid off, and what we see, projected to us on these websites and stuff is all an illusion, just to create that fear, right? And keep us in that hamster wheel. What are your thoughts on that as a possibility?
I don't believe in fairy tales, and I wish I was wrong. I would love for the NISARA, GSARA people to be correct. I would love for all the debt to be gone and expunged, and all those things. However, I'm a practical person, and I also am typically a skeptic.
Mhm.
So, instead of wasting time wishing that one day just we'll all be rich and all the debt's gone away, and somehow for the first time in history the powers that be just decided to do something great and amazing for all the people instead of being corrupt and controlling like they've always been. I'm not counting on that day coming, so instead I built a economic system within my companies that can do all the things that the people who want NISARA, GSARA, and QFS would like it to do. So I'm building, I'm not waiting.
Right. I love that. I think that's the practical approach, honestly. If we're just to sit around and wait for anything that we're apparently that's supposed to be coming, I mean, what do? You're just sitting there like you're complacent. You're just a zombie. You're not doing anything.
Right.
I'm a FAFO kind of guy.
And create, because this is exactly what humanity needs to do, is create systems that make the old ones obsolete, instead of trying to fix the old systems they're not broken, they're designed that way. They're working exactly how they're designed. That's the misconception. I hear, oh, it's broken. No, it's working perfectly how it was designed. And that shows you the evil that's behind these systems and the real agendas going on. It's not really incompetence and ineptness. There might be a lot of that on more of the surface level, but really at the layers that are controlling things, it's designed perfectly as enslavement, and all the technology that should be used to benefit and free humanity is being used instead to enslave and harm humanity. And this needs to stop. But it's like what we need to do is what you're doing, is create systems, create technology that will free humanity outside, create your own system basically, and then stop supporting that system. If enough people can, we start waking up to what's going on. That's what I think the phase we're in now is kind of like the great awakening phase of what we've been in for a long time, that we've been asleep to for a long time. And now we have to make a choice through our own free will of, do we want to keep supporting that, or do we want to create something else and support something else? And things like what you're doing is a perfect example of that.
Well, thank you. I'll just say I'm no one's savior, and Trump is no one's savior. There's only one savior, and you're probably not going to meet him in this life. So, do the best you can while you're here.
Right. And, or you are your own savior, right?
Yeah, I would say we are all our own.
Right. We're the ones that are going to pull ourselves out of this mess. Yeah,
There's a divine,
this has
intelligence.
this has been great. I appreciate you sharing your time with us and sharing all of your knowledge and information. Is there anything else we didn't cover that you'd like to talk about that you'd like our audience to know?
Well, I could go on forever, so you'd have to let me know.
Okay. Well, I guess I will ask you one more question. So in your time in the military, so you started as a combat medic and then went into psychological operations?
Yes, that's correct. So essentially, I was running an emergency department in Tripler Army Medical Center in Oahu, Hawaii, and I was the senior NCO medic in charge of all the military personnel within that emergency department. And an order came down saying that they needed a medic in a civil affairs assistance mission, and it had to be a E6 or above, and I was the only one that fit the bill. So I wasn't like I was specifically special or anything. It was just more circumstance. And then I started doing the missions, and they just kind of realized I was more capable than what they'd seen previously from other people attached to them and assigned to them, and they wanted to keep me. So that's just kind of how that went.
Right. So whenever you're talking about things and that guy who wanted to blow the whistle to you, things that would require a specific security clearance, a need to know type of information, but you seem to have been talking with people of that caliber. How was that possible?
So there was a lot of people that assumed my clearance was probably higher than it was. I did have a secret clearance, and I did have SAP or Special Access Program information, but that was typically very compartmentalized. However, when you're on these type of missions and you're in civilians with a beard and carrying an MP5 in a laptop bag, people tend to just talk to you, and they talk a little more freely than they probably should, because they don't know who you are, and quite often it was assumed that everyone in the room was completely keyed in.
Wow, that's interesting. I mean, you find yourself in these situations. Yeah. At what point, like, did this information shock you? Like, or did you kind of understand that it was all happening before you even joined the military?
Yeah, I mean, I joined at 17, so I was pretty naive back then. But by the time I ended up in these briefings and things of that nature, it was not a surprise to me whatsoever. More so, I was surprised by the lack of competence of the standard government within the public-facing sphere.
Wow. So you mentioned being at underground bases at certain points. Are you able to share which bases you were
No,
at?
no, I can't share locations or which bases. I have been in quite a few, and for various different purposes.
Can you give us an idea on how deep some of these bases run?
So typically 10 kilometers for a large complex or facility. 10 kilometers is basically the universally agreed upon safe zone of things will not reach you when nukes are going off over your head. If you are 10 kilometers under, some were more shallow than that. Some, just started at surface and progressed down.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, I would imagine. I mean, I would imagine that they're probably even deeper than that in some cases.
I'm sure there probably are. Of course, there's challenges at that kind of depth as far as heat and the mantle and things of that. The engineering challenges must be monumental, and I, of course, put some thought into that as well. And the only way that they're possibly building these is with nuclear boring machines or plasma boring machines.
Right.
So it's very impressive. I'll say that.
So have you come across an ancient tunnel system that looked like it was built by a previous civilization?
I have been in two that I would say were unlikely to have been built within the last millennium.
Interesting. Yeah, I've heard people talk about that. Um, I mean, I don't know. I can just throw questions at you all night, but I guess we'll start wrapping this up. Thank you so much. Can you please let our audience know where they can find you? We'll share all your links in the description, but let our audience know for the listeners where they can find you and how they can follow your work.
Yep. So the easiest place to find me is on Twitter at PLR_2024. I am shadow banned because Elon is he's not an honest man, but I'm on there, and you'll have to search me directly.
Okay. And then do you have a website or do you have anything like that you'd like to?
So I have about 5 different websites, all for my companies. They're not necessarily relevant to what I'm talking about here, but the other easier way to reach me is by email, patrick@reaper.financial.
Great. Thank you. Well, like I said, this has been incredible. I mean, I love your approach on all this information. It's so refreshing to talk to somebody in your position instead of somebody claiming to have memories of these programs, which is nothing wrong with it, but we've done that. And I love that people are coming forward now and we're getting new intel, essentially. I mean, you know, we know about this stuff, but to actually hear it from the horse's mouth and people who have talked to people and know people from within these organizations and intelligence agencies, it changes the game. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. And you know, I'm a very skeptical person. So those other people out there, and I know Carrie wanted to ask me about, you know, a few dozen other people, and it's not that I don't believe them, and it's not that I do. It's that I of course can't substantiate anybody else's claims. So I'm typically very cautious in what I say and what I would support. But I do challenge the audience to think of it more from a practical possibility standpoint, and measure it as far as what was possible and when was it possible, and then drill down on the finances. And I think you'll find what most of your audience would probably looking for when they go looking for a secret space program.
Right. I agree.
Right. And for anyone who's you know, knows a lot of the UFO information, you know, about Roswell and all the crashes that have been found and all the reverse engineering of ET technology that's been done. It's kind of like that's where it wasn't much of a leap for me when I discovered the secret space program, because I'd already researched all that information. I'm like, well, yeah, of course they have the technology to create space fleets and go, like, they've reverse engineered all this ET technology, or some of it that's been given to us, you know, maybe. And you know, the whole history of the Nazis and what they did with that, you know, and then we kind of like caught up to them. And
frankly,
and there's just so much going on in that realm. Of course, the SSP is real to me.
it would be very sad if we'd spent trillions of dollars on a black budget and hadn't achieved interstellar travel.
Right.
I would say that would be very pathetic of the governments.
That alone. Right. Exactly.
So
right.
really quick, I did want to ask you this earlier and I forgot your thoughts on Gary McKinnon, the NASA hack,
Gary McKinnon.
and what he found. And one of the things that confused people was that there was names of vessels that seemed to match names of vessels that we had as far as aircraft carriers and Navy destroyers, and people had a problem with 2 ships being named the same thing. But I think you maybe explained that why this could be in the previous interview.
It makes perfect sense to me, because if you create 2 and somebody comes later on and they say, "Oh, I was stationed on the Eisenhower," okay, that can mean 2 different things, right? So there's U.S. Naval vessels, and there's USSS, which is the United States spaceship, which sometimes share the same moniker. And that makes it a lot easier for the government to get away with things, a lot easier to hide it, but it also makes it a lot easier to cover it up and to cover the budgeting and the resupply. I'm sure if we look into the trillions of dollars the Pentagon loses every year, I'm sure quite a bit of it is probably the resupply of provisions to different naval vessels that probably are taking more than double what they actually need in terms of food and sustainment and logistics. So the truth is always in the fine print of the following the finances and breaking down the logistical elements of what's been happening.
Right. So did you look into the Gary McKinnon hack?
I have looked into the Gary McKinnon hack. As far as I can tell, it's completely legitimate. I have no reason to think otherwise.
Right. I agree.
Right. And if you listen to what he said he found, he's like, yeah, off-world fleets,
And a cigar shape.
cigar-shaped craft, like
Right.
they showed the craft, like he's seeing all this stuff that's pointing to breakaway off-world space fleets
And that makes
technology.
perfect sense. Cigar-shaped craft as our designs would make perfect sense coming from a nuclear submarine fleet, but also you have angular momentum and gyroscopic instability. So essentially, if you think of a washing machine and you throw a pair of boots in it and it starts to shake, right?
Right.
Now imagine if you did that with a gyroscope, but instead of spinning around with a pair of boots, you make it so that there's a gyroscopic instability in a single direction. And now it's diametrically pulling that device, especially if you have a few of those gyroscopes rotating and then pulling in one direction. And now you would be able to steer something like a tube-shaped cigar.
Right.
So it's an ideal design.
Wow. Interesting.
There you go.
Okay, now I guess we're gonna wrap it up.
All right, now we're gonna.
Right. Thank you for joining us. Thank you guys for tuning
Yes.
in. Thank you for all the support. Come hang out with us in Tucson, Arizona at the end of September. Tickets are available below in the description. Save $50 with either Aaron or I's discount code, and day passes are now available if you can't make it for the whole time. It's going to be a lot of fun. I've never been to Tucson, Arizona, but I've heard it's amazing out there. So I'm excited about that. And we can't do this without you. Thank you all for the love and support. Don't forget to sign up for our Patreon if you haven't. It's only $5 a month. A lot of bonus and exclusive content over there. And I guess that's it. Good night, everybody. We love you. And until next time, have a great evening.
It was further agreed that the alien nation and the United States would exchange 16 personnel each to the other with the purpose of learning each of the other. The alien guests would remain on Earth and the human guests would travel to the alien point of origin for a specified period of time, then return.
Well, what shocked me was how they selected the astronauts. But they went out and found people within the military that were orphans and didn't have any family members and weren't married. Now that's a difficult task, even in 1960.
But this became quite a mainstay in early ufology of the 1990s, given that in addition to Request Anonymous telling this extraordinary story, there were several alleged DIA or Defense Intelligence Agency officials who were also coming in and saying, yeah, we have knowledge of this case too, and we can verify what Request Anonymous is talking about.
Could you estimate what his level of intellect was?
Smarter than me. He was smarter than me by a long range.